So I think we see goal-driven lesson planning as being, in some way, true lesson planning. That often teachers feel that they think they're doing lesson planning, but what they're really doing is just creating a list of activities that they're going to do in a classroom in a specific order. And we see goal-driven lesson planning as being something fundamentally different from that.
Mm-hmm. I made the discovery when I was working with student teachers. I'd go and ask for their lesson plans, and what they tended to tell me was, in effect, the sequence of activities that they were going to do. If I tried to reorient them, well, let's think about it from the perspective of the learner. What's the learner going to be able to do? They basically use vague words. Well, they'll understand this or appreciate that or be able to understand something or another. It was very vague. And they also didn't have a way to measure whether what they were doing was successful or not. They'd tell me something vague. I think the class went well. I think everyone liked it. And that wasn't particularly useful. So working with Christina, who took many of our student teachers in, we began to try to figure out, how do we do this better? There must be something.
Yeah. So when I actually plan the lessons for my classes, I always have a lesson plan. Well, first of all, I have a lesson sequence for things that I'm actually going to do in the classroom, because of course you need to know what activities you're going to do in what order. But that's not my lesson plan. My lesson plan includes the actual goals or objectives for what students are going to be able to do or say differently in English as a result of that activity. And when I've shown my lesson sequence to a student teacher, or a student teacher has sat in my classroom, and then I've said, okay, now reconstruct, what were my goals? It's been really hard for them to do that. Mm-hmm. And when I ask them about their own experiences, I often get things, as Marnie said, where they say, I'm going to review the homework, or I'm going to do page 12 in the grammar book. And that's not any sort of goal-driven approach to a classroom.
So the second problem that I discovered was there's a little seminar class that accompanies the student teaching, and because this is often what they call the capstone activity, there should be a textbook. So I had a textbook that forced the students to reflect, and I thought that was really wonderful, because so often they come out of one class and start getting ready for what they're going to do for the next class, and I want them to stop for a moment and think, what did you learn from this experience? Would you do anything different the next time? And so on. But the problem that we quickly discovered was when I would tell them, so for next week, read the chapter on lesson planning, and you might want to think about these kinds of things, and I'd give them ideas to think about. And my plan was, next week in class, we'll go beyond what the textbook said and expand. But what the students began to pick up on was, but wait a minute, the textbook is saying this and you're saying that.
Yeah. So the textbook would talk about things like you need to consider grouping, you need to consider varied activities, you need to consider duration and materials, all of which, of course, you need to think about for the classroom. But that's not the essence of thinking of lesson planning. That's not thinking about where are your students now and where are they going to be at the end of this. What's the point of actually doing this activity? So those are the things that we'd like people to start to think about, and to think about in a more both more reflective on the one hand and more rigorous on the other hand way as a result of the book.
Mm-hmm. And the question that I asked students at the end, my student teachers at the end of the lesson was, with the how did it go, was the lesson successful? And then the question becomes, how will you actually know if the lesson succeeded? Not something vague like, I think they liked it, they seemed to enjoy it, or we got to the end of chapter 8, but rather, what were the students doing as a result of what you were doing? And actually, I've had student teachers tell me, you know, you forgot to look at me, or you never looked at me. And I'm interested in what are the students doing. That will tell me what the teacher's doing if they've met the objective.